Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Hope you all having a great day. And you know, with the draft less than 30 days away, as I think it's approximately 25 days, I want to say. I'm gonna do my, I guess, second to last mock before my official one the day of the draft. And it'll be a 2 round mock draft. That way we can get into more of the other players that I haven't really talked much about. So, with no further ado, and I will be doing trades in this mock, so you'll see some of the trades I think could happen. But number one, it is the pick that it has always been in Fernando Mendoza. Yeah, there's been talk about Ty Simpson. For some unknown reason, people think he's better than Mendoza, which there is no fact to that ever being true. Mendoza has been the clear quarterback one since the end of the college season, before the playoffs even started, maybe even way before that. Um, so Mendoza, the easy pick at number one, and I think honestly 2 and 3 might be locked in because I think two is going to be Arvell Reese, just because I think the Jets want to go with the potential. Like it's kind of what the Jags did a couple of years ago when they picked Trayvon Walker over Aiden Hutchinson. They went with the potential pick. And Walker has still been a really good player and will get a contract extension soon by Jacksonville. I think the Jets, like the Jags back in 2022, will go with the potential of Reese over maybe a more proven product like Bailey or Bain, just because teams always value a potential of a guy instead of the player that is proven to be good right away. And I think three is a pretty easy pick. I think it's Francis Mauigoa. I know some people have speculated they could go edge because Josh Sweat apparently wants out, and they have really needed to address that position for a while. But I think Mauigoa makes the most sense. Like Arizona, they brought in Isaac Seumalo to help out at the guard position. You have Paris Johnson, who is one of the best young left tackles in the league. You need right tackle. They brought in some backup guys, but I don't think that would stop the Cardinals from drafting Mauigoa, who I think is the number one tackle in this class. Some people say Palmer Freeling because he's a left tackle. Mauigoa's a right tackle. Uh, some people still think it's Spencer Fano, who I think has had his like prospect ranking fall down because of the shorter arms. Even though at his pro day his arm was a lot longer than they were at the combine. So this year, for some reason, the combine numbers were not the correct numbers. But I think Mauigoa makes the most sense. And then I think Tennessee is where the draft starts, at least as of this point. I think they could go in plenty of different directions. They could go Jeremiah Love, which I have done a couple times. But I think they end up going with David Bailey out of Texas Tech. I think Robert Saleh wants to get another defender on the edge. They brought in Jermaine Johnson, who obviously was with Saleh with the Jets. They bring in John Franklin Myers, who was also with Saleh with the Jets. You have Jeffrey Simmons. I think he'd want to fortify that defensive line and really give the Titans a great defensive line that would be able to get after the quarterback, stop the run. I like Bain a lot more. I'm probably one of the few that's lower on Bailey, but it seems like he's going to go ahead of Bain. So I have Tennessee going edge, but they could go Love, they could go Cardinal Tay, they could go plenty of different directions. But I think right now it's Bailey. Then 5, I'm gonna have a trade. Yeah, I'm gonna have the Giants trading back with the Saints. Yeah, we're gonna have a 5. And then since we are doing 2 rounds, I'll do the 42nd pick. Oh, they say it would just be 5 for 8, so I guess I'll do that. Confirm. Yes, I'm gonna have the Saints moving up because I think if Bailey and Reese go inside the top four, a team like the Saints, maybe the Chiefs, the Bengals, maybe even Dallas could think that Ruben Bain isn't going to make it to their pick. And I think a team could trade up. I think the Saints could be that team, wanting to improve that defensive line. I'm having them go Ruben Bain at fifth overall. I know it might seem a little weird that the Saints would trade up, but I think the Giants have been talked about as a contender to trade back. So I think I think if Bailey goes for maybe one of those teams that needs a premier edge rusher, like the Saints, maybe the Chiefs, Bengals, Cowboys, maybe Miami, although I don't think they should do that. I think could trade up to 5, and the Giants could then trade back, still get a Styles or a Downs, and still be really good. Even maybe draft one of those receivers. I think would still have a really good draft haul by trading back. I think it would be more than 8. I think they'd have to give up more picks, but it said that 5 for 8 was a likely trade, so I'm just gonna keep that. Around to 6 with the Browns. I think it comes down between wide receiver, Carnell Tate, or if they want to go tackle with Freeling, who is a pure left tackle, and left tackles probably the second most important position. So I could see them wanting to go Freeling, maybe. I don't think Caleb Lowell's gonna go that high, but I think they end up going Tate. I just think it makes the most sense. Like Cleveland addressed the offensive line, bringing in Titus Howard, Zion Johnson, and Elton Jenkins to at least fortify that offensive line. You have DeJuan Jones at left tackle, although I still think the Browns should go tackle with their second first round pick. And I think, if Tate makes it to 6, which is possible, I think the Browns should sprint that pick and get an elite wide receiver, keep him in the state of Ohio, and really give this team an elite playmaker alongside Harold Fannin and Quinshon Judkins as a nice young talented core for whoever that quarterback is of the future. Moving on to the Commanders at 7. I'm going to go Jeremiah Love, which some people might say is questionable, but I think if he doesn't go 4, I know people have talked about the Giants, but I don't think he ends up going to New York. And you look with the other teams like the Saints and Chiefs, where he was mocked to, they brought in running backs, so they're not going to take him. And Washington makes sense. They were in the market for a free agent running back. Didn't get any body. And if he falls to 7, they could just take him. They addressed edge with Owe and Chason. They brought in Leo Chanel and Nick Cross, and Amik Robinson. Like they brought in all these defenders in free agency to help out that defense. So I think they can go Love, and you'd have Love, Terry McLaurin, Chigga as a nice, talented core for Jaden Daniels to have, and it gives Daniels a young running back to grow with. Washington's offensive line is pretty solid, so I don't think this would be like an Ashton Jeanty situation where it's like he would be had a horrible rookie year. I think he'd be able to have a really good year, and I think the Commanders make a lot of sense for Jeremiah Love. We're on the Giants at 8. I think it's between the 2 Buckeyes. It could be a receiver or a corner because those are big needs, but I think it ends up being Sonny Styles. Whether they're picking 5th or somewhere else, I think Styles makes a lot of sense. They signed Tremaine Edmonds, but that doesn't mean they're locked in on not going after a linebacker. And I think, Styles can be there, you know, green that. He can be the guy who's calling the plays, from, when the DC gives him, he can be the guy to give everybody in order and complete the front seven, because, they have an elite defensive line. So if you get that linebacker, it would give you an elite front seven. The secondary isn't the greatest, but I think will be improved. And I think the Giants can trade back and still get one of Styles or Downs and be really satisfied. But now the Chiefs at 9, I think if Carnell Tate would have fell, he'd be the pick. But I think with him off the board, they go with their biggest need. And that's Mansour Delane, who is clearly the top corner. Because McCoy hasn't played at all, didn't go at the combine. I don't know if he was at his pro day, if he did anything, but Delane seems to be the top guy, and a Chiefs team that lost their top 2 corners to the Rams, coincidentally, need to address that position, and I think Delane makes a ton of sense. And then, hey, back in the first round, they could maybe draft a wide receiver or somebody else. So you can get an elite corner at 9 and still be able to use that second first round pick to address another need. We're on to the Bengals at 10. I think it's Caleb Downs if he falls. Like, Downs is a perfect fit. And honestly, it might make sense. Al Golden, the Bengals DC, who were at Notre Dame, coach Kyle Hamilton. Now, Downs is a different type of player, but I think he could play that same role Hamilton has with Baltimore and Golden. Obviously, coaching Hamilton at Notre Dame would know a lot about that. And they have a good safety duo. They brought in Brian Cook. You have Downs. And they have some young pieces all throughout the defense. Maybe year 2 under Al Golden, they can improve and finally have a defense that's good enough to compete, where it's like they're not going to have to put up 30, 40 points a game. Moving on to the Dolphins. This is my first mock post the Jalen Waddle trade, so I think that can play into who they select at 11. I think it comes down to one of the receivers, because I think, they could select one at 30 with the Broncos pick. I don't know if there would be a wide receiver available. I think they could go offensive line. Maybe they go Monroe Freeling, because this is a new regime, so they're not, connected to Patrick Paul, who Chris Grier drafted to be the Teron Armstead replacement. So I think it comes down to one of those positions. It could be McCoy, but I think his injury might push him down the board. This could be a safety, honestly, just because, trade away Minkah Fitzpatrick. Who do they have out there at safety? So I think it could be plenty of different positions, but I think they go with wide receiver Mekhi Lemon. I think it makes the most sense for the Dolphins, because you trade away Jalen Waddle, clearly saying that you want to move on from the Chris Grier era and sort of bringing your own guys. At pick 11, where at least one, if not multiple, Tate, Lemon, and Tyson will be available. And I think it makes a ton of sense for the Dolphins to address wide receiver at 11 more than 30. Moving on to 12 with the Cowboys, I think it's going to be a lot of positions. I think it should be on the defensive side. So it could be McCoy, it could be Thieneman, could be a lot of guys. Because I think there are a lot of positions outside of defensive tackles. There's a lot of positions that Dallas needs. And I think, they went to trade for Max Crosby, didn't get him. Traded for Rashawn Gary, but I think could still use an edge presence. But I think I'm going to end up going with Dylan Thieneman, I just think, they bring in Jalen Thompson, which I thought was a nice add, but you still need another guy at the other safety position. Um, and like at 20, they can address edge or corner. I think at 12, if they want to just go best defender available, I think Thieneman could be that pick. And, nice safety duo with him and Thompson. And you hopefully can bring in a better linebacker, maybe another edge and a couple corners. And that Dallas defense can start to look like a respectable unit for 2026. But on to the Rams at 13, I think, you're obviously not going to go corner anymore because they addressed that hugely. I think this could be a wide receiver, Jordan Tyson, maybe, because maybe the Rams, maybe they aren't going to bring back Devontae Adams after this year. Puka's going to get his extension, so maybe you want to bring in one of them. I see a lot of people say Kenyon Sadiq, which I think would be a little weird just because you bring back Tyler Higbee. You drafted Taryn Ferguson last year. You have Coley Ferguson, Davis Allen. They have so many tight ends. Even if Sadiq wouldn't really be a tight end, he'd be more like a wide receiver. So I get that could be the pick. I think tackle is in play. Even though who would you really go with at 13? I think there's plenty of guys. I think linebackers in play, but I don't know if you'd really pick CJ Allen this high. It's really an interesting pick. But I feel like the Rams don't have many names. And you know what? I'm in my second trade. I'm gonna have the Rams trading back. The Rams trading back the Steelers. Yeah, 13, 21. Let's do those two picks. Yeah, I'm gonna say the Rams. I'm gonna say the Steelers trade up ahead of their division rival Ravens to select Vega One out of Penn State. A guy who I've mocked a lot of times to the Ravens, and I think could be the pick. But the Steelers, you lose Isaac Seumalo to the Cardinals, so you have that need. You could go with like Monroe Freeling if you think Robert Jones is like no longer a capable left tackle, and you can bring in somebody else. Maybe they want to draft Tyson, but I think they trade ahead of the Ravens to go Vega Owane and address that offensive line for more than likely Aaron Rodgers. But out of 14 with the Ravens, I think this could be Tyson, and I would love that as a Ravens fan for them to get who I think is the best receiver. I think this could be, one of the tackles, and maybe you move them to guard or center. I think this definitely could be an edge rusher. Maybe a defensive tackle, though I don't think it'd be that. I'm gonna go with Spencer Fontaine, who did center drill at the combine. Now his pro day arm length was a lot better than the combine arm length, so maybe he still is a tackle, but the Ravens who have to, they've only Ryan Johnson, and you lose Tyler Linderbaum. Fano could end up being either your center or your left guard if they don't get Awanu. And I think it would make a lot of sense for the Ravens to invest into this offensive line. Like Lamar, one of the most talented quarterbacks in NFL history, but he's not going to be able to be his full self if he's not able to make the plays we see routinely because he's having to dodge defenders once the ball is snapped. Went on to the Bucks at 15. I think this should be on the defensive side. It could be linebacker. Levante David retired. Brought in Alex Anzalone. You know, who else do you have at the position? I think this should be an edge. I'm gonna go Keldrick Falk out of Auburn, who I think has been a little underrated. I think a lot of people, see that he isn't the greatest pass rusher per se, and might say, "Oh, is he really going to be a lot?" But he's going to be, I think, one of maybe the youngest rookie in this class. I think he turns 21 like September, October. So he's still really young. He's amazing against the run, which not many of the edge rushers in this class can say. And I think Tampa, who needs to address um this team. I could see you going McCoy because you lose Jamel Dean, and you have a couple of young guys on the outside with Morrison and Parrish alongside Zion McCollum. I think edge rusher is a much bigger need in this Bucks team. Hasn't really had elite pass rush since like Shaq Barrett and JPP from 2021. Well, to the Jets at 16, obviously went with Arvell Reese at 2. So here at 16, I think they could go a couple directions. I think they could go Tyson because they need a secondary wide receiver. I think they could go possibly with like offensive linemen and move them in at guard because you lost both of your guards and John Simpson and AVT. I think this could be on the defensive side. Like you could go with like the first defensive tackle, maybe an edge rusher. So I think maybe even a corner. So I think there's a lot of directions the Jets could go. I think I'm gonna go Jordan Tyson, who could go a lot higher than 16, but the injury concerns because there's multiple injuries, not just like one with McCoy where it's like it was a torn ACL, and a lot of players now are just coming back even better than after the torn ACL. Tyson's had plenty of injuries throughout his college career that I think could hinder teams from wanting to draft him. And I think the Jets, who Geno Smith's more than likely going to be the starter this year, you got to get him weapon. You have Breece Hall, who hopefully you can get a contract extension with. You have Garrett Wilson, who, when healthy, is one of the best receivers in the league. You have Mason Taylor, a young tight end, but you don't have really another receiver. You have AD Mitchell, who I think could still be something, but I think they need a secondary wide receiver, and Tyson makes a lot of sense at 16. But at 17 with the Lions, I think I would go Monroe Freeland. And you move on from Taylor Decker, which was pretty surprising as a move, but clearly saying that they weren't going to keep him around for much longer. But Snowden at left tackle. Maybe you move Penei Sewell over to the left side, which he played in college, and then you draft a right tackle at 17, which I don't hate, but why not keep Sewell on the right side where he's been an all-pro elite player, and then draft a left tackle to replace Decker, and then you have a good offensive line so they can get back to playing the way they were under Ben Johnson instead of like not really the greatest running game from this past season. One of the Vikings at 18, I think they could go in plenty of different directions. I think they could go safety. So it is a bit high for Emmanuel McNeil Warren. So I think they'd want to hopefully have Thiedemann drop down. They could go corner, which is definitely a need. They could go defensive tackle or edge because Jonathan Grenard's apparently in trade talks. You have Dallas Turner and Van Ginkel, but maybe you want to bring in somebody else. I think On the offensive side, maybe you'd want to go with like one of the tackles and push them inside to help out this offensive line. I think it's more so defensive oriented for Minnesota, and I'm going to go with McCoy. Could go a lot higher than 18, but the injury concerns might have teams wondering, how it might be. Teams might be concerned with McCoy post injury. Is he going to be the same player? Is he not? And I think Minnesota, who and you have Isaiah Rodgers and Byron Murphy, but Rodgers only has 1 year left on his deal. Murphy, I think, only has 2 years left on his deal. So I think, McCoy could fit right in and be another guy for Brian Flores to use to help out this defense, which is one of the best in football. But out of the Panthers at 19, I think this you could go defense, and I, wouldn't say you shouldn't because they still have holes on that defensive side. But I think bringing in Jalen Phillips and Devin Lloyd, edge and linebacker were two of their bigger needs. I think this could be tackled because Ike Ekwonu is going to miss more than likely the entire season coming off that injury that he sustained in the wild card round. And it's his final year of his contract. So if Carolina doesn't want to bring him back, you could go tackle to replace him and then sign Rasheed Walker. So it's like you could have a guy sit behind Walker for a year and then replace him in 2027 to be the blindside protector for Bryce Young. I think you could go receiver if maybe you're not gonna if you're not going to keep Xavier Legette for really anymore. But I'm gonna go with Kenyon Sadiq. I think Carolina, yes, has invested into the tight end position in back-to-back drafts with Tavian Sanders and Mitchell Evans, but Sadiq's better than those two guys and isn't really a tight end per se. He's more of a wide receiver in a tight end's body. And it gives Bryce Young another playmaker. And I think Sadiq, there's not many teams that you realistically could say he could go with. Because a lot of the teams people were mocking, either brought back their guys or signed other tight ends. So it's like, who is he really going to land with? And I think Carolina could be the perfect fit for Sadiq because he doesn't have to be a true inline tight end, and he can be more of a pass catcher for this offense to give them another element in the future. But the Cowboys at 20 went with Dylan Thieneman at 12. So I think this way you can go, I think, either edge or corner. And I think they'd prioritize getting a corner. And I think I'd go Avion Terrell, the younger brother of AJ Terrell, an amazing corner who I think could be an outside guy. A lot of people have kind of sticked him into being a nickel slot corner, but I think he can play outside, and Dallas needs really good corners because for a while, when they had Diggs and Bland, those guys are more like they'll get interceptions and it'll be huge, but they'll give up a lot of big yards. Terrell isn't that kind of corner, and I think it'd be very valuable for the Cowboys to get a guy who can really be a lockdown guy on the inside and outside for a team that really desperately needs better defensive play if they want to succeed. But on to the Rams at 21, obviously traded back with the Steelers. I think this is a pick that, I think trading back the Rams could be a possibility just because at 13, it's I feel like there's not many options to go. I feel like at 21, they're better off. And then I think I'm gonna go wide receiver with Denzel Boston. I just think, with Devontae Adams only having 1 year left on his contract, who knows how much longer he will be playing and if he'll be a Ram. And I think you get Boston, you compare alongside Nakua as two, elite outside receivers for the future. And it gives you, another playmaker for whoever that long term quarterback is once Stafford retires. What are the Chargers at 22? Probably hoping Vega Wane would fall. Even though there are some guys um at guard that you could maybe consider going, but I think this would be an edge pick. You lose Odafe away. Have Khalil Mack and Tui Pelotu. How much longer is Mack going to play? And Pelotu's up for a huge extension, so I think this team needs to bring in another edge rusher. And I think I'd go with a guy who has kind of also been underrated because of his short arms and people not really thinking he can be a good pass rusher, and Cassius Howell, who I think can be a really talented player. And I think the Chargers, who, you lose Oweh, who got a massive contract from the Commanders, gonna have to replace him. And I think Howell, alongside Pelotu, could give LA a young duo on the edge. You have the interior contained with Tahir Tart. So I think you can get another defensive lineman to help out this unit. What are the Eagles at 23? And this could be, the AJ Brown replacement. If Brown does get traded, he hasn't yet, but a lot of people still speculate. I think this can be a couple positions. I think this could be tackle because even though Lane Johnson is returning, he might end up retiring after the year. So maybe you want to bring in his replacement. I think this, like I said, could be a wide receiver if they do end up losing, and then do end up losing AJ Brown and trading him away. But I think defense makes a lot of sense. You lose Reed Blankenship, you're gonna have to replace him. They drafted Andrew Makuba last year, so I don't think they would go safety here, but they could. I think they'd end up either going linebacker, replacing one Georgia linebacker with another, but they already have that position really filled up. So I think they'd end up going either edge or defensive tackle because Jalen Carter has been in trade rumors, so who knows if they keep him, but I think they go edge. And I'm going to go Keem Mesidor. I think, an older guy, so because he's going to be 25 before the 2026 season starts. So I think a team that drafts him should be trying to compete right away. And I think he'd make a lot of sense in Philly. Nolan Smith has shown potential, but hasn't really been this elite player. So they need better pass rush. I think they missed Josh Sweat off the edge, and Mesidor can give this Eagles defense an immediate boost off the edge to help them out. What are the Browns at 24? Went Carnell Tate at 6. So I think you got to address tackle here. There's a lot of guys you could go with, but I'm gonna go with. I'm gonna go with. I'm gonna go with Max Iahanochor, who out of Arizona State has a interesting story. Not playing football until he moved from Nigeria to America at 13, and is really still growing into being a player. And I think, the Browns, who need to left tackle and either one of the guards, depending on what position Zion Johnson is going to be playing. And I think Ian Hotshore, who is a raw player, but I think could emerge as a top tackle for the Browns to help this team out. But the Bears at 25. I think this is a defensive pick. This could be the first defensive tackle, and I wouldn't hate it because you have some decent guys on that defensive line, but you don't have many elite guys. But I think they made some good moves in free agency, bringing in Kobe Bryant, Devin Bush, Neville Gallimore to help this defense out. So I think I would go, and I think they would go Emmanuel McNeil-Warren out of Toledo. You lose all three of your safeties and C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Kevin Byard, and Jaquan Brisker. And Kobe Bryant, who will at least replace one of those guys, but you're going to have to replace the other two. And I think EMW makes a lot of sense for a Bears team that is trying to, stay competitive, trying to be, picking this late every season. So I think making the right picks and drafting these guys really does make a lot of sense. But on to 26 with the Bills. I think this could be a lot of positions. Like, I wouldn't hate if you said wide receiver just because, yes, they traded for DJ Moore and you have Khalil Shakir, but outside of that, you don't really have much else. Maybe you think guard because they don't have a second round pick from the DJ Moore trade, but I don't think there's any guy really. Although you could say Chase Pasantis out of A&M, but I think this probably should be a defensive position, just because I think the defense wasn't the only reason, but was a big reason in why they lost that game, and I think they should address these positions. And I think I'm going to go with C.J. Allen out of Georgia, who can give this Bills defense another top linebacker that they haven't really had since they had both Matt Milano and Tremaine Edmonds. And I think this could be edge, this could be potentially guard, but I think C.J. Allen makes a lot of sense here at 26. But are the Niners at 27? I think this comes down between either one of the receivers, because you bring in Mike Evans, you have Ricky Pearsall, not much outside of that. So, like, you could go with one of the receivers and help out Brock Purdy. I think this also could be offensive line because Trent Williams either will be traded or released, because it seems like him and the Niners are very far apart from really making any contract, restructuring happening or maybe extension. I think it comes down to either bringing in another weapon for Purdy or protecting him. And I think protecting him is the better option. And I think I would go with Caleb Lomu out of Utah. Well, I think, whether Williams is there or not, can be the future left tackle of this team. And, maybe if Trent Williams can stay in 2026, you can put Lomu at right tackle, maybe guard. And then once Trent Williams retires, or they're going to have to move on from him, you can put him at left tackle and have that position secured for hopefully the next decade plus. On to the Texans at 28. I think this is where the first defensive tackle will go off the board, because, Houston doesn't need tackle because you have Ariante Ursary at left tackle. They brought in Braden Smith at right tackle. So you at least have those two positions secured for at least this season and hopefully the next couple of years. They have the guards and Wyatt Teller and Ingram. So I think while you could go guard to, hopefully have the Wyatt Teller replacement, I think it makes a lot of sense to go defensive tackle. And I think Peter Woods still ends up being the top defensive tackle off the board, just a lot later than most people thought he would have been. I mean, Houston, they have every level of the defense secured. If they bring in a defensive tackle that can both stop the run and get after the quarterback, I think it would finally give that defense, you know, a full unit. If the offense is better next year, I think the Texans will once again be contending in the playoffs. But now the Chiefs at 29, this is from the Trent McDuffie trade. Went Mansour Delane at 9. So 20 picks later, I think this could be a receiver because yes, you have Rashee Rice or Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy, but those guys aren't really the most consistent guys, and with the injuries and not really been the greatest receivers, so maybe they'd want to go Concepcion or Omar Cooper down here, and I wouldn't hate it. I think you could go tackle because you're gonna have to bring in a right tackle now that they've released Jawan Taylor. So I think that is an option. I think edge rusher is an option because George Karlaftis is fine and hopefully he can have a bounce back year, but you don't have much outside of him off the edge. So I think they could go plenty of different directions. You can even go with 2 corners, go Delane and somebody else, but I think they should go with tackle, and I would go with Blake Miller. It fills a hole at right tackle. He's a plug and play guy. He started, I think, over like 50 some starts, I think, in college. So he's a plug and play tackle and could really give this Chiefs team, and you have the full offensive line finally there for the future to protect Mahomes and really be able to, like when he comes back, have a front 5 that can really be able to help this offense out. Because last year, I think one of the main reasons why they couldn't run the ball was the offensive line was not the greatest because they were banged up and they were moving guys around. I think if all 5 of those guys are healthy, then you can have an elite offensive line to protect Mahomes for the next, hopefully, decade plus. But now the Dolphins at 30 obviously went Makai Lemon at 11, although they could have gone somewhere else because the receivers have fallen here at 30. But I think they end up going with tackle because I think this team needs offensive line help. Though I think I'm end up going with corner. I think I'm gonna go with Colt Hood out of Tennessee. I just think um Miami needs to address the secondary and really improve it. Especially when you move on from Minka Fitzpatrick, who was like the best player in that secondary. They haven't really had elite corner play since like Xavier Howard in like 2021, maybe 2022. And I think receiver and corner should be the addressed issues of, I think, offensive line and possibly defensive line could be in play for Miami. We're on a 31 with the Pats. I'm going to go with, I think there's a lot of guys you could go with. Receiver is in play. I think there's a lot of guys you could go with. But I think I'm going to go with edge. I'm going to go Zion Young. I just think you lose Caleb Von Chason. who only signed a 1 year deal, so I'm surprised New England didn't try to give him a similar contract. But you have Harold Landry, who was decent this past year, but I think you have to improve that unit. And if you bring in Young, you have Barmore and Milton Williams on the inside. You can have an elite front four for New England and really be able to you know make this defense even better than it was last year. And finally, the Seahawks 32nd. This could be plenty of options, but I think the biggest need. I'm gonna go Brandon Cisse to finish out the first round. I just think it makes a lot of sense. And you lose Reek Wallen to the Eagles. They were able to bring back Josh Jobe and we'll get an extension with Devin Witherspoon. But what if one of those guys goes down with an injury? You're gonna have guys who can be able to come in, and I think Cisse could be a phenomenal pick for the Seahawks at 32. But the Jets at 33 went Arvell Reese at 2, and then went Jordan Tyson at 16. So 33, I think they could go plenty of options. Could go Caden Proctor and move him into guard. I wouldn't hate that. I think there's plenty of options to go with. And I think I would have the Jets help out that defense going with TJ Parker out of Clemson. Or not TJ Parker. I say going with corner. I want Chris Johnson out of San Diego State. They need to help out that secondary, which didn't get a single interception. You bring in Minkah Fitzpatrick, which should help, but you're going to need to bring in more guys around him. And I think at 33, that could be the pick. Maybe they go Ty Simpson. Maybe they go somebody else. But I think Chris Johnson makes a lot of sense at 33. 34 with the Cardinals. I think this is where I'm going to have Ty Simpson going. I don't think he's a first round prospect. Though we've seen guys like Jackson Dart or Penix and McCarthy, even a guy like Anthony Richardson, guys who are late day one picks or late day one, early day two picks that end up going in the first round just because of the QB need and teams want to get that 5th-year option for that quarterback. So maybe the Cardinals, maybe the Jets, the Browns trade up. But I got Simpson falling here to 34. And look, the Cardinals clearly, don't really have a long-term plan. They're going with Jacoby Brissett and Gardner Minshew. Right now, I think Ty Simpson can be in play either if Arizona trades up into the first round or early day 2 with that 34th pick. The Titans at 35 went David Bailey at 4. And I think this is where wide receiver can be in play. They couldn't go at 4, but I think this is where they could end up going. And I'm going to go Casey Concepcion. He does have a bit of a drop problem, but I think, Tennessee, Brian Daboll, they bring in Wan'Dale Robinson. You can bring in Casey Concepcion, Elagayo Manor. And Chimere Dike gives you a nice young receiving core for Cam Ward. To help him out. I think they could go running back, in the 3rd round to bring in somebody else, and you can finally have a nice young nucleus on this offense for Brian Daboll to help out. We're on the 32nd with the Raiders. Had Fernando Mendoza be the top pick. I think 36. I think they go with his Indiana teammate, Omar Cooper Jr. you need to help out. Like they brought in Jalen Naylor, which I thought was a good move, but you still need to help him out. They have Trey Tucker, Jack Bash, Dante Thorne, but I think they could bring in Cooper, who has the familiarity with Fernando Mendoza and would give this Raiders offense another piece to help out Mendoza. They improve the offensive line. Tyler Linderbaum. I'm sure they could bring in some other guys later on, and they do have some young guys who they hope can improve. So I think you don't need to go offensive line at 36, and you can address um wide receiver. 37 with the Giants went Sonny Styles when they traded back to 8. So I think here at 37, could consider wide receiver because that's a position they could think about maybe at 5. But I think guard I think is in play. And I'm gonna go Chase Pasantis out of A&M. They have Andrew Thomas and Jermaine Illuminor as their tackles. But that interior offensive line is going to need to be improved. And I think Pasantis, an early day 2, maybe late day 1 pick, can help out Jackson Dart. You can protect him. Yes, they do need to bring in more weapons, but I think protecting Dart is a more important thing than bringing him weapons. Because if he doesn't have a good offensive line and he's getting sacked all these times, he's not going to be able to develop into the quarterback the Giants want him to be. And so I think Pasantis makes a lot of sense. 38 with the Texans. Who did we go with Houston at who did we go with? We went with Peter Woods, that's right. So I think this could be offensive line. Caden Proctor possibly. I think this could be maybe a wide receiver. Christian Kirk's no longer there. You have Nico. We'll see what happens with Tank Dell off of his injury. This could be a lot of different positions. I'm not really entirely sure what they should go with. I'm gonna go with Caden Proctor, who they could who could be the Wyatt Teller replacement, like I was talking about earlier, and you can move him into guard. Maybe if Ariante Ursery doesn't work out, or maybe if Braden Smith gets injured, you could put Proctor maybe at right tackle or move Ursery over to right tackle and have Proctor at left tackle. I think there's a lot of positions that they could go to help out CJ Stroud at 38. Went on the Browns at 39, went Carnell Tate at 6, and then went, I forget who we had going at 24. It was Max Iahanochor. So I think 39, this, I wouldn't, maybe Ty Simpson falls to 39. The Browns could potentially select him, but I think they should go help out this defense. Now that you've addressed your offensive needs with a receiver and a tackle, they can go defense. And I think, you have Myles Garrett at one side. I think they need to bring in a secondary edge rusher. And why not go TJ Parker, who could be a first round pick when it's all said and done. And they drafted Mason Graham last year, who at D tackle, so you can help out that defensive line. Maybe if like one of the linebackers, because you could go linebacker if you're the Browns, because you lost Devin Bush. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah more than likely will not be playing. Pair somebody alongside Carson Schlesinger. But I'm going to go Parker here at 40, went Delane at 9, and then went Blake Miller at 29. So I think this is where you could go, possibly receiver. I'm going to go with a defensive tackle. I'm going to go with Caden McDonald, who could end up being the first defensive tackle off the board, could be going a lot lower than this. And you have Chris Jones, but you lost Mike Dana. They lost to Sean Wharton last offseason. You're going to have to bring in, more interior help, especially with Jones. How much longer is he going to be playing now entering year 12, I want to say, or year 11? So McDonald, I think, makes a lot of sense. But on the Bengals at 41, I mean, I think it's defense for the Bengals. I mean, offensive line is a need, so yeah, I don't hate them trying to address that, but I think you gotta go defense. Went downs earlier. I think you can go with corner. I'm gonna go D'Angelo Ponds. They have DJ Turner on one side. No longer have Cam Taylor Brett, so are gonna need to bring in somebody else to replace Taylor, who hopefully will be better. And I think Ponds, who can be an outside corner, can be an inside corner, I think would give outgoing versatility, kind of like Downs, giving him versatility to play multiple spots. And the Bengals are going to need that if they want to be any better in 2026. The Saints, where we had them going Ruben Bain because they traded up to 5. I think at 42, this is where they could go linebacker with Jacob Rodriguez. You lose Demario Davis, who goes back to the Jets where he was drafted. So are going to need to replace him, and I think Rodriguez makes a lot of sense. A guy who had a really good combine, a really good pro day, and I think can give Brandon Staley his quarterback of the defense to replace Demario Davis. And then you replace Davis and Cameron Jordan with Ruben Bain and Jacob Rodriguez. I think that'd be a nice new duo for the Saints to build around on defense. Went on to 43, but the Dolphins went Mekhi Lemon at 11, and then went Colt Hood at 30. I think this could be offensive line because they desperately need offensive line help, but I'm going to go edge with or Mason Thomas. I just think, they need to address that defensive line. Move on for Bradley Chubb, who is now a Bill. We have Chop Robinson, who hopefully under Jeff Hafley will have a bounce back third season, but you're going to have to bring in more defensive line help, and I think R. Mason Thomas makes a lot of sense. Is more of a DPR, designated pass rusher, but I think can give this team another dynamic defensive lineman for Hafley to be able to use. Out of 44 with the Jets, and for second round pick, so they have 2 firsts, 2 seconds. The Jets are hopefully going to come out of this draft with a lot of players to really help this team out. Went Arvell Reese and Jordan Tyson in the first round, and then went Chris Johnson with their first second round pick. I think could go a lot of different directions here because they have so many holes on this defense. So I think you could go Christian Miller to replace Quinnen Williams. They did bring in T'Vondre Sweat, but I wouldn't hate them bringing in another defensive tackle. Could go wide receiver. Just bring in another guy. But I am going to go with I'm going to go defense. I'm going to go safety with AJ Hawsey out of LSU, the Houston transfer. And yes, they run in Minkah Fitzpatrick, but who knows how long he's going to be with the who knows how long he'll be with the Jets. And you got to help out that secondary. Halsey, Chris Johnson, and Arvell Reese. All three defensive players, and then one offensive player with Jordan Tyson, I think, really can help the Jets be much better in 2026 than they were this past year. But on the Ravens at 45, went with Spencer Fano at 14. I think at 45, defense should be the pick. And I'm going to go with Gabe Akis. Yeah, this is around the same range, or Mike Green was probably a little bit later, but when they drafted Mike Green, who hopefully will take a year two step with Jesse Minter. You can bring in Trey Hendrickson, but you still need more on that edge rusher, defensive line help. And I think Akis can help out and give the Ravens another defensive lineman who hopefully improve this defensive line to where, teams aren't just being able to sit back there and, find open guys. Instead, the Ravens are able to get after the quarterback. Went on to 46 with the Bucks. Went with Keldrick Falk at 15. I think at 46, I'm going to go with corner. I'm going to go trade in Stooks out of Arizona. A guy who can help out the secondary. And I know corner isn't the biggest issue. You have Zion McCollum, who has emerged into a really young, talented guy. You have two sophomores in Benjamin Morrison and Jacob Parrish, but I think you can still help out that group and get another body out there. You can't have, there's multiple positions where it's like you can never have enough of that position. You just always need more and more. And corner is one of those positions. So I think Tampa hitting the table for this pick. Went on to 47 with the Colts. Obviously their first pick of this mock because they don't have a first round pick because of the Sauce Gardner trade. I think there's plenty of options to go. I think you could go receiver because you move on from Michael Pittman, bring back Alec Pierce. You have Josh Downs, but not much else after that. I think edge is in play. I think tackle also. There was a guy worth picking would be in play because you lose Braden Smith. I'm gonna go linebacker with Anthony Hill Jr. out of Texas. Trade away Zaire Franklin, which I get because of the money, but are gonna need to replace him. And I think Anthony Hill, who could end up being a first round pick, when it's all said and done, I think the Colts would love this pick and would give them their new quarterback of the defense to replace Franklin. And I mean, the Colts recently with, Darius, then Shaq Leonard, and then Zaire Franklin, they've had some really good later round linebacker hits. So I think second round Anthony Hill could be a phenomenal pick for the Colts. 48 with the Falcons. So this is also their first pick of this mock. I think wide receivers in play. Darnell Mooney, no longer there. You have Drake London and not much else after that. So I think receiver could be in play. I think corner could be in play. Plenty of positions. Edge could be in play depending on what happens with James Pierce. I think I'm gonna go wide receiver with I think I'm gonna go Chris Brazzell. Yeah, it's the typical Tennessee receiver, big and fast, but I think he's different than like a Dante Thorne or a Jalen Hyatt or even Cedric Tillman from a couple years ago. I think he can be like a real difference maker. Not that those guys haven't been. It's just usually the Tennessee receivers aren't really the greatest in the Josh Heupel era. So I think Brazzell is a different type of guy. And I think a Falcons team that, finally invested into the defense, last year and really helped them out. I think you go wide receiver to give Tua or Penix another um receiving option. The Vikings at 49 went Tremont McCoy in the first round. I think this is where they could go safety if um Dylan Thieneman doesn't fall, or maybe they end up going Emmanuel McNeil Warren. I'm gonna go with defensive tackle with Christian Miller. They move on from Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen, and they're gonna have to bring in somebody else on that defensive line to help out. And I think Christian Miller, a Georgia defensive tackle, makes a lot of sense for the Vikings to help out that defense and give Brian Flores an interior defensive lineman who hopefully can be there for a couple of years. The Lions at 50, who went Monroe Freeling at 17. I think this is where you could go defense. And I think I would go edge rusher Malachi Lawrence out of UCF. We could go higher than this, but yeah, I think the Lions have kind of neglected that secondary pass rusher opposite of Aiden Hutchinson, and I think they could do in the first round, but I think more likely on day 2 they could get one to help out this defense to make it better. We're on to 51 with the Panthers, like Kenyon Sadiq at 19. I think would go defense here. I'm gonna go with Genesis Smith out of Arizona. They have JC at corner, so maybe you want to get another corner. But I think safety, they have Trayvon Modig on one side. You can get Genesis Smith on the other safety side and really be able to build out this defense for Ejiro Evero. And maybe, this defense is a lot better in 2026 with these additions, and they're able to be much better and have a winning record at the end of the day. What are the Packers at 52 making their first pick because of the Micah Parsons trade? I think there's a lot of positions Green Bay could go with. And I think I'd go with Keith Abney, corner. Although you could go offensive line, because they move on from Elton Jenkins. But I think Abney makes a lot of sense. They've needed corner help for a while. They released Nate Hobbs. Don't have much outside of Keyshawn Nixon, who's not really the greatest player. So I think Abney makes a lot of sense. Steelers at 53 went Vega Owane to help out that guard position and to fortify the offensive line. I think at 53, but go receiver. Michael Pittman, I don't think stops them, especially when you don't have much outside of him and Metcalf. I think defense makes a lot of sense. And I think there's multiple different positions I think they could go. I'm gonna go wide receiver. I'm gonna go with Jeremy Bernard, who I think could really help out this Pittsburgh offense and give them another guy on the outside for Aaron Rodgers and whoever that future quarterback is in Pittsburgh. We're on to the Eagles at 54. I think this could be a wide receiver as well. Where did we go with at 23? We went with Key Mesidor to help out that line. I think this could be receiver. I think this could be safety. I don't think there's a guy worth taking here, so I think maybe that'd be a 3rd round pick. So I am gonna go wide receiver with Chris Bell. Really hurt his draft status just because he was considered like a late day 1, early day 2 pick, but took 10-year ACL, more than likely won't be back until after week 1, maybe later in the season. But I think Philly, who you lose Jahan Dotson, so even if you keep AJ Brown, you only have him and Devontae Smith, so you're going to need somebody else. And I think Bell could make a lot of sense for the Eagles. The Chargers at 55 went with Cassius Howell at 22. Could still go edge rusher because you want to just beef up that defensive line. But I think this is where Emmanuel Pregnon out of Oregon can go and you can finally improve that guard play. They're bringing Tyler Biotis. Center isn't really a major concern. And then Pregnon can fill out at least one of the guard spots. And they can hopefully fix this offensive line so that it can be fully healthy and be really good for Justin Herbert so he's not taking all these hits. We're on to 56 with the Jags. This is obviously their first round pick because this is their first pick because they traded away Travis and the Travis Hunter trade. So could go multiple different positions, but I think linebackers in play. I'm going to go Josiah Trotter, the son of Jeremiah Trotter, and brother Jeremiah Trotter Jr. You lose Devin Lloyd, which was kind of surprising given the contract that he got. But I think Jacksonville can use their first pick in this draft to address that need and hopefully be able to replace the player or at least replace the production Lloyd had in 2025 so that the defense doesn't lose a beat. Around to 57 with the Bears. Grabbed Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. So I think defense should be with this next pick. And I'm going to go Lee Hunter at Texas Tech. Could go a lot higher than this. But was really talented guy, and I think the Bears who need to address that defensive line to be better. I think Hunter could make a lot of sense. With the Niners, went with I think we went tackle, I want to say. Yeah, we went Caleb Lomo out of Utah. So I think receiver is in play because you still need receiver. I think guard could be in play. Jennings Dunker, maybe Keelan Rutledge, maybe a center. I think that, edge rusher is in play because Bryce Huff announced his retirement. They're going to go with Danny Dennis Sutton in Penn State, another Penn State defensive lineman who can wreck the quarterback and is really good. And, the Niners, they drafted Michael Williams last year, who coming off a major injury, same as Nick Bosa. Maybe bringing a guy who's going to be healthy for week 1 could help out this defense. 59, the Texans went plenty of different directions. Went Peter Woods with their first round pick. Then went with, who did we go with their first, second round pick? We went Caden Proctor to help out that offensive line. So I think at 59, it's going to be a wide receiver. I'm going to go with Skylar Bell out of UConn. There's a lot of good day 2 receivers that I like, and you lose Christian Kirk. Still have Nico, who's undefeated wide receiver 1, but Hank Dell coming off that major injury. Who knows what he'll look like in 2026? So I think getting a receiver could make a lot of sense. On to the Bears at 60 went Lee Hunter just early at 57. I think, could go offensive line, maybe center. I guess Garrett Bradbury. Who knows how long he'll be playing, but I think defense makes a lot of sense. And I think I would go with Derek Moore out of Michigan. I think they need to help out that defensive line. So going to defensive players makes a lot of sense. I think if they went offensive line, maybe receiver. Because you trade away DJ Moore, maybe you went to bring in somebody else, especially when they lost Olamide Zaccheaus. But I'm gonna go Derek Moore. The Rams at 61 went with what did we go with at 21? I think it was Denzel Boston. I think at 61 could go tackle. I think I'm gonna go with tackle with Demetrius Crownover from A&M. Yeah, giving the Rams some bolstered offensive line play to help out. Another 62 with the Broncos now making their first pick. Now that Jalen Waddle is a Bronco, they trade away their first round pick. I think defensive tackle, huge need now that over the Lions. Could go tight end. Maybe, Oscar Dell, Justin Joey. But I'm going to go with Caleb Banks, who might just end up falling because of that injury concern. And Denver could scoop him up late day 2 or late second round and be able to bring in probably 15 top 20 player in this class. Just injuries are going to affect them. 63 was the Patriots went with. Who did we go with at 31? We went Zion Young. I think this could be offensive line. Oh, and I'm going to go with Sam Hang out of Kansas State. The center. Trade away Garrett Bradbury. Could move Jared Wilson over to center, but why not just draft a guy to be that center? I mean, keep Wilson at guard, keep Wilkin left tackle, and then you only really have to worry about right tackle for the future with Morgan Moses. And then 64th, the Seahawks. I'm going to go with running back Darian Price to finish out this 2-round mock. Yeah, Darian Price, Jeremiah Love's backup going here. And yeah, that is my 2-round mock draft. Hope you guys enjoy the video. Hope you guys like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And I'll catch you guys in my next video. But until then, hope you have a great day and bye.